Hello everybody and welcome to People's Scrutiny Commission. I'm Tim Kent, your chair. It's a bit intimidating up here. I apologise that we've got to use this chamber. It's not the most friendly, but it's COVID safe. So just going through the business of the agenda, and I'm looking to Dan here, who's going to save me whenever I make a mistake. I've got the paper on the right side. So first off, welcome and introductions and safety information. Do we need to sort of say where the fire exits are? It's fairly obvious, isn't it, I believe? Yeah, so yeah, if there is a fire, proceed out the main door. And next up, we've got apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Dan? So yeah, Councillor Weston's given apologies to the meeting, and Councillor Gollop, welcome. I believe you're substituting. Councillor Godwin is on her way, I believe, as Exec Cabinet member, which is brilliant. Any declarations of interest that people... Oh, yes, Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Chair. It's an indirect declaration of interest in respect of item 9, actions for people with learning difficulties. My wife is a carer for her brother, who is an adult with learning difficulties, and I will be making comments on that item, and I wouldn't like it to be not known that I have an indirect interest. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Townsend? Mike?
Till the end of August, I'll be working for one of the specialist mats in the city.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bales and then Councillor Rippington.
This one? Yeah, just my son's autistic and he's caught up in the whole Sen saga, so I could be commenting about things to do with my son.
Thank you. And Councillor Rippington?
Just ditto.
And I also have a child with an EHCP. So, okay. Are we done with all of our declarations? Right, wonderful. So next up, we have the annual business report, and I hand over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much. I'd ask the Commission to refer to item 4, which is the annual business report. The Commission is recommended to note the membership of the Commission for this new municipal year, to approve the Scrutiny Commission's terms of reference, and to note the dates and times of the meeting, which is today, and the rest are to be confirmed at the agenda the work plan setting in September. And finally, the Commission is asked to ratify the appointment of Warda Avali as a statutory parent governor representative co-optee. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Were there any questions at all about that? Oh, yep, Councillor Townsend.
Yeah, I'm just interested to understand the process whereby the parent governor was co-opted.
That's fair enough. Dan, do you want to just talk us through the legal element of the statutory co-optees on the panel?
Okay, thank you. The Commission's asked to refer to page, I'm just finding the right page for you to refer to in the report. They're not numbered. So paragraph 2 refers to statutory co-optees. It states under the Local Government Act, there's 4 vacancies for qualifying persons to be co-opted onto this commission, which is the Overview and Scrutiny Commission that deals with education matters. So there's 2 vacancies for parent governor representatives, and there's 2 vacancies for faith representatives from the Church of England and Catholic Diocese. In terms of the parent governor representatives, nominations were asked for, and we had 1 nomination for our co-optee, and she fits the eligibility criteria, which is to be not to be employed by the local authority, not to be employed by a school maintained by the local authority, and not to be a councillor of any local authority.
Great, thanks,
Does that
Dan.
answer your question?
Thanks, Dan. Warder, I was just wondering, did you want to briefly say hello to everybody and just explain where you're a parent governor? Would that be useful?
Hello, my name is Warda. I'm a parent governor for Rosemary Nursery School in St. Jude's. It's my first meeting, so I'm just trying to figure out how things work for now. Thank you.
Thanks. And then to explain, the statutory co-optees do have voting rights, like councillors on education items. So that is written into the law. I think we're not used to actually having many of the statutory co-optees on the commission. So welcome. We're pleased to have a statutory co-optee. And I think at least one of the church education directors is considering joining as well. Is that correct? Yeah, so, but that's not been fully processed yet. So we may have another co-optee joining us next meeting. Was that enough, Councillor Townsend? Were there any other questions on this item? No? Great. Okay, so we're going to be moving to minutes of the previous meeting. So you should see these in your pack. I've read through them as one of the people who's present, and they seem fine to me. Were there any comments or issues with the minutes, or are we happy to agree them? I don't see anybody raising any issues, so I will move the minutes as correct. Does anyone want to second that? Oh, thank you, Councillor Massey. So we'll take that as that's voted through, because I can't imagine anyone voting against that. So that's the minutes agreed from the previous meeting. Now, actually, that comes in quite nicely under Chair's business then, because there was an action in the minutes that I wanted to bring up, and that was regarding, so I'm just looking here, Adoption West. So Adoption West is a joint scrutiny panel set up to oversee Adoption West, which is a regional adoption company, which basically is taking on board several of the local authorities' adoption services, and they have formed their own adoption company. This is partly because it was the government agenda to regionalise adoption agencies, and I think we just got ahead of the game and set our own up. Unlike some other areas, it is wholly owned by the local authorities. So the local authorities who have set this up, which is Bristol, South Gloss, North Somerset, Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, and us. I think that's all of them. Baines, I think that's it, are the owners of Adoption West. Now, a scrutiny panel has been established to look over this, and we have to appoint a member. It was Councillor Johnson, Carol Johnson before, but she's no longer a councillor, so we definitely need to appoint somebody new. They had a meeting last week, which I attended, because I thought it was important we had a member present. But I wanted to open up to see if any members of the commission, any councillors, were really keen to do it. It's about 4 or 5 meetings a year. You cannot be substituted, and only one of those meetings has to be in person. The rest, it was already set up to mostly be on Teams anyway before COVID hit. It's not something you normally have to drive very far to attend. It obviously has quite an important role, and within our minutes in March, it does refer to the annual business report of the Adoption West Scrutiny Panel, which has now been produced, which we will circulate to all members. I guess my question is, did any member wish to leap up today and say they'd be really interested in doing it? If not, are the panel happy to give unto me the power to appoint someone onto Adoption West if they come forward in the next few weeks? And if no one does, I'm happy to do it. I just wanted to open up to others first, that was all. I'm not seeing anybody jumping up and down yet. Helen Hollenby, their wise head, realises that I'm not likely to... Oh, sorry, was someone... Helen was volunteering someone, but they weren't noticing. Councillor Massey, would you be interested? No, fine, that's fair enough. Well, I'll tell you what, I will leave it open. Are the panel happy to delegate to me the option to put someone onto the panel if someone in the next few weeks just sends me an email? Is that okay? Great, that's fine. I think I got a general nod to that. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to do it myself. And the in-person meeting in October is in Keynsham anyway, which I worked out is 3.5 miles from my door. So if I've got to drive to a super regional meeting, 3.5 miles is not too bad. So we will ensure that the annual report is sent around to you within this week, so you can see that. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Secondly, I'd just like to welcome Warder here to our commission. It's nice to have a statutory co-optee. So welcome, and as hopefully was clear, I believe you have, you certainly have voting rights and speaking rights on the educational items. So if you wish to participate, particularly in those areas, just put your hand up like any other commission member. If I don't see you, shout at me. I've already detected there's a real problem. You concentrate on one side of the room, and then you blindside the other side. So I'm noticing I'm concentrating on you guys on the right, or my right. So you guys on the left, you might have to throw something at me if I'm not looking. I apologise about that in advance. So I will keep trying to check out both sides. Anything else under Chair's business? Have we covered it all? No. Oh, right, yes. And then just to sort of say, our other co-optee is Judith Brown. Welcome once again back with us. I've been told you're a guest, but you're with us so regularly, I think of you as more than a guest, as a friend at least. Right, welcome. Okay, next up, public forum. Right, so we have in 2 sets of questions and 2 statements. First up, and I can see Jen is here, Jen Smith. I've got 2 questions and 1 statement. Jen, which do you want to go with first? Do you want to go with your statement or your questions?
Hello. Shall I go with questions?
That's fine. Now, people should see that the questions have had an answer, the initial questions. So you've got 2 supplementary questions. So do you want to go straight to your supplementary questions, Jen?
Yeah, I only got a chance to look at the response to this as I was coming to City Hall, so I haven't really taken it completely on board. My supplementary question, my first one, is pretty much connected to both my questions. Bristol City Council hasn't released minutes about the Inclusion in Education group under the Freedom of Information Act. Now, this group was set up in 2016 and was tasked with coming up with the cuts to the high needs block, which was ruled unlawful under the judicial review. And I think I read that these meeting minutes have been lost, which I think is really concerning. But also, since I've submitted this question, I've also had a further Freedom of Information request refused regarding correspondence between Bristol parent carers and the local authority, because the communications are considered personal data, despite the fact that it's corresponding over £15,000 being allocated from the local authority to Bristol parent carers to fill a CEO role with the organisation. So my question is really, because it feels like a lot of the time send information isn't particularly given in a transparent manner, what can we do to make sure that send information is given under the Freedom of Information Act in a sort of transparent manner?
It's a perfectly reasonable question. I'll ask Alison Hurley, the Director of Education, to respond. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In relation to the 2016 minutes, obviously it was a different iteration of the Inclusion in Education group, and there does not seem to be records held centrally, and all of the officers involved in those meetings have subsequently left. So that does pose an issue in terms of releasing any minutes. In relation to the wider freedom of information, there's quite a clear set of guidelines around releasing information through an FOI to do with the time it will take officers to put the information together, the nature of the information, how sensitive it is. So if there are specific requests being refused or rejected at that stage, it is likely to be hitting one of those particular criteria through the actual FOI framework. I can certainly take the supplementary question away and come back and follow up with any further detail on that, but it'll either be that it's exceeded the time available or there is a sensitivity issue either to do with an individual or a group.
Thank you. Jen, I think you have one more supplementary question.
Yeah, it was to do with the Alternative Learning Provision report. I think speaking generally on behalf of sort of Bristol's SEND parents and carers, I feel like that we don't feel that we're particularly well involved in co-production, and the alternative learning provision in Bristol has been really shambolic, and this is something that I think that we need to be really heavily involved in. And I was just like, how's that going to happen? I know you put a list of things in the responses, but I think it was through established networks. I was just wondering if you could just sort of expand on that a little bit more, please.
Yes, certainly. So I completely agree. I think a broad view from children, young people, families, partners is absolutely essential in terms of the co-production against the alternative provision review and the subsequent action plan that follows. I think we are really clear that the kind of information, the lived experience, particularly for those young people who possibly are now adults and have been through the Bristol system, is incredibly important that we capture. So in the supplementary information against the statement of action against the ALP review, there's a really clear co-production report which looks at varying different ways of how we can work with individuals and families and key stakeholders in order to elicit a really broad view of the quality and what needs to happen to improve. So the action plan that's come out linked to the report that I'll be talking through later is very much the first draft, the first iteration. Co-production needs to happen. There are varying different routes through, and we've obviously provided the detail through promotion with schools and settings, looking at working with a wide range of existing parent groups that operate across Bristol and not just focusing on one particular, and then obviously through all of our other networks that we've established and that are in place that we've been working with as part of that broader co-production against the SEND written statement of action. So absolutely agree that we need a broad spectrum of views in order to develop a robust action plan.
Thanks. Alison, can I just raise a little bit of concern regarding the minutes of an internal officer meeting? Can I just check then and obviously I realise that was 6 years ago, so well before you came on scene. Are we ensuring that now minutes for internal officer meetings are being logged and kept separately to their own computer systems? Because I'm sort of aware in the digital age, it's very, very easy for things to get wiped and lost. In fact, the IT department hate the fact I've got 12 years of emails on my email account. But I'm just sort of aware that that's unusual, and quite often people sort of delete emails these days out sort of within months. Are we logging now on safe servers internal minutes? Or if not, can you go back and check and make sure we are?
I certainly know from the meetings that I'm involved in, we're using SharePoint now. So the good news is that obviously the IT systems are completely different to 2016. So for all of the meetings that are formally governed and convened, there is a SharePoint site, and certainly we've come away from those individual recording on individual officers' computers, which I think is what the issue was for the 2016 minutes.
That's great. And can I just check, there's not a policy to sort of wipe minutes after a year or 2 years on SharePoint. They'll be stored there. Okay.
Not. I don't know the time scale, but certainly not for that short space of time.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, Jen, I think you had a statement as well. Normally it's a minute, but at the moment you are our public forum, so if you want 2 or 3, I'm sure that'll be fine.
Thank you. I'm doing a statement about the findings by Sir Stephen Bubb with the autism review. And I think before I start, I'd just like to explain that I'm doing this on behalf of my 2 children who are autistic, and I'm also speaking from the point of view of an adult who probably is autistic as well. So the autistic community in the city has been so badly let down that now autistic children and adults are facing a future where Bristol can no longer be described as autism friendly. Appendix A with the Building Rights Review states, in Bristol, we want to follow up the report with an aggressive challenge to the iniquitous social experiences of people with learning disabilities, autistic people and their families have. Marvin Rees is behind this. Unfortunately, Marvin Rees is also behind keeping systemic barriers in place for autistic people. This can be seen with his approval of the trip hazard skate stops, the calling of specialist provision as segregation, the silencing of SEND parents by hiding perfectly reasonable comments ahead of his re-election, and his trigger-happy blocking of people on Twitter raising equality issues. He has a history of dodging SEND questions from elected members by referring to mainstream education when asked about SEND provision. I've seen that in the chamber several times over the last few years. Aggressive is also a really inappropriate word to use. Autistic pupils frequently have meltdowns at school caused by lack of provision, awareness, or reasonable adjustments. This leads to pupils being excluded, sometimes unlawfully and potentially off-rolled. They end up with labels such as aggressive. This is also reflected in tonight's AP report, where pupils' reputations preceded them in the managed moves process. Statistics released by Sendist found 3 cases of disability discrimination heard in 2020 regarding Bristol schools, and with successful results. The likelihood that at least one of those cases featured an autistic pupil is likely to be extremely high. Unfortunately, as is the case with Sendist hearings, they are often accompanied with confidentiality rulings, meaning that wider lessons cannot even be learned. When it comes to lived experiences of the autistic community and their families, change only comes on individual levels with legal challenges and open justice. Families seeking help are usually pushed down the troubled families route in a system which approaches disability and child protection as one and the same. Bristol will not be an autism-friendly city until it is brave enough to challenge and hold to account those in charge of systems, governing schools and creating services and policies which discriminate against autistic people. And I'd just like to finish off saying that I've been going round City Hall meetings since 2018 on this massive SEND roller coaster that just goes round and round in circles. And just when you think you've got somewhere, it just all goes off round again. And I just really think it's, although I think we are starting to see some strategic change with the direction of education. I think there are long-term improvements. I've got a lot of hope around the alternative provision report. I just think, you know, it's been allowed to get out of control. Managers, senior executives in the council have been allowed to be paid huge sums of money in their wages, and there's been no accountability, and it just has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Also for a public forum, I have Hayley, who has 2 sets of questions in. Is Hayley present? No. Okay, so hopefully, councillors, you've seen those questions. I presume the answers will be sent on to Hayley. And then we have a statement from S. Smith. I think he's not present here today, but I hope everyone's had a chance to read it, because it was I thought, very, well, it was very emotional reading. It's actually from a child with an EHCP in our city, telling us about his experience. So if you have not yet had a chance to read it, I encourage you to go and read that. Okay, I think that's it for public forum. Brilliant, thank you. So next up, we had COVID-19 update. Yeah, it's not here yet. Okay, so what we're going to do is, just to buy a couple of minutes, because we are 5 minutes ahead of schedule, if it's okay with everybody, we'll skip on to the end of the report and just the work programme. So if you can go to agenda item 13, it is actually quite short, because the main issue with the work programme, well, Dan, do you want to talk about the work programme, or should I just tell people? I'll pass over to you to get the expert then.
Okay, thank you. So the Commission was asked to refer to the report that went to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board on the 12th of July. It was explaining the intentions for setting this year's work programme. It was agreed, as there was a high intake of new members this year, so as to ensure a proper induction process and there's enough time for members to have a proper training programme, that the summer would be pressing items, priorities that the chairs and the leads of the commissions decided to do some scrutiny work on, and the main work programme would be set at a large work programme setting meeting in September. So Essentially, that will consist of being informed by other members, cabinet members, the administration, members of the public, and of course, decisions made by scrutiny members.
Thanks, Dan. So I think to just clarify for everybody, we as a commission are basically allowed, as in the resources are available for us to meet 3 times a year. In addition to that, we can hold one task and finish group. Those can be quite intense in time, a task and finish group. As chair, and I think at Leeds as well, we thought it was important. We had quite a few agenda items of pressing reports that we did meet. Many of the other commissions are not meeting before September, but we felt that we should meet, hence why we're meeting here today. So the work programme there will look to set the agenda for the 2 following meetings, and in particular we also need to have a strong think about what we really want to delve deeply into, and that will be our task and finish group. So everyone will have a think about that, because we'll need to make that decision probably early September. Okay, brilliant. So over that last 2 minutes, oh yes, sorry, Councillor Gollop.
Chair, it was only a practical point that the good work that was done by the task and finish group last year. It just, and I think that was on special educational needs, but I think there were other things as well. And I think it would be very useful to, somewhere in your work programme, make sure that those issues are raised. I know I probably won't have to persuade you very hard to keep that in the agenda, but I think an enormous amount of work went into that task and finish group, and it would be a pity not to follow up on it specifically.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago we did EHCPs, and last year was, I think it was around several areas, including special educational needs. I think it was the impact of COVID was the main theme of it, and we held it over the summer period. But no, that's a good point, and it's something we need to think about. Where do we want to spend our time and try to have the most impact as well? I think that's the another key thing. Okay, anyway, if we go straight on to agenda item... Oh, sorry, Councillor Massey.
I was just going to suggest that because it's quite a number of changes on the composition of this committee, it might be helpful to recirculate those reports to the new members so they can see what work we did last year. Yeah,
we can do that. Shall we'll send both of the reports from the last 2 task and finish groups so people can see what came out of that. Okay, so agenda item number 8, COVID-19 update. Christina, welcome. If you want to spend 5 or 10 minutes giving us a briefing, and then there will be a short period for 1 or 2 questions, but we don't have a great deal for this. We just wanted to make sure we got a briefing there on the first day when there are no legal restrictions. Thank you.
That working now? Great, thanks. So the slides are up on the screen, and Dan is going to drive for me. Thank you. So this is just an overview of the summer plan, the COVID summer plan, COVID-19 summer plan, which was published 2 weeks ago now. And that is what sets out the direction of travel for the next few months. In essence, it moves everything from today from a position of guidance rather than law, with the exception of health and safety at work regulations which pertain. So all employers, and indeed anyone who manages a public building or anything like that, has to obviously take health and safety into account. So that hasn't changed. And we continue to have public health regulations if we're managing an outbreak. But all of the requirements, the legal requirements to make space, cover your face, all of those things have gone. A large part of the summer plan is reinforcing the vaccination programme, so nationally and locally. Bristol we're doing very well, and we've got some very, very innovative work, but still we have got around 55%, slightly less now, of our eligible population population who have not had 2 vaccinations. And to get the maximum protection from the vaccination programme, you need to have had two vaccinations and be a couple of weeks post your second one. Now that's partly because we've got a younger population here, so they all started coming through a little bit later, but also because we've got some pockets of vaccine hesitancy that we've been working with. Test and trace will stay in place, but they're describing it as being proportionate. And from August the 16th, there'll be a change in the way the algorithm, the way that contacts are managed. There'll be no change at any point in the legal requirement to isolate if you are infected. So if you're a case and you have a positive case for COVID, isolate for 10 days. That's a legal requirement under public health regulation. But if you're a contact, that is likely to change in August. The proposals are that people who are double vaccinated or people who participate in daily contact tracing could be released from the requirement to isolate. We've got quite a bumpy period to get through between now and August because our infection rates are so high that many businesses are being impacted quite badly by people being contacts. So I would anticipate we'll see policy changes possibly coming through ahead of August because I'm not sure it's sustainable at the moment. We've already had policy change overnight around health and social care. A big national focus on managing borders, and that's both managing our borders but also managing the global response to the vaccine rollout, which is absolutely in everybody's interest. We need to get everybody across the globe vaccinated, not just ourselves, because this virus knows no borders. And then I would just draw your attention to the final chapter in the plan, which is euphemistically called retain contingency plans in the event of unexpected circumstances. And I would read that as the modelling suggests we may get into difficulty, and the government is keeping its options open in having to pivot round and take other action. Now the national context for this change is that nationally cases, hospitalisations and deaths are rising and are expected to rise. And we are also anticipating a winter with what we're calling COVID plus. So all of the infectious diseases that had been controlled by the COVID measures, so flus, other respiratory viruses and norovirus, are likely to come back with a bit of a vengeance this winter. So next slide, please. These are our headlines of today. Just to remind you that we publish our Bristol COVID data twice weekly on the Bristol website, the outward-facing public website, and that's the link there to it. Should be quite easy to find. And there's a narrative from me in there, plus all the data. The data changes daily, but we publish this twice a week, just to sort of to have a nice rhythm around it. So as of today, 625 cases per 100,000. On Friday, we broke our own glass ceiling in terms of case rates. So we now have more cases than we've ever had at any point in the pandemic. That's since March. You can see the England rate there, nudging 400 per 100,000. 2 doses of the vaccine are proving effective, but it's not 100%. So as these rates go up, you will start to hear people who've had 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine becoming unwell, some of them seriously. That doesn't mean the vaccine isn't working. That's simply that vaccines are never 100%. What we're dealing with here is the Delta variant. It is simply has adapted to be highly transmissible, much more transmissible than any of the previous variants. That's its advantage. So it's outcompeting other variants, and so far has done so. Even variants that have come subsequently, the Delta variant is outcompeting it. So next slide, please. So I've just got a few slides just to put it in the Bristol context. Now, this isn't the most recent one, and all you need to see is the colours. The one on the top left was where we got to at our peak in January, and the one on the bottom right is where we were about a month ago. Now, that one today, I haven't had time to update this slide, but that is now pretty bright blue all over the city. It was city central last week. This week it's much more in the south and the eastern corridor, but cases all over the city and rising. Next slide, please. Again, you don't have to see I can't even read that, but that is all of the local authorities in England. And we are the red blob, the furthest left. The next one is South Gloucestershire, and the other one is North Somerset. So that's just showing you where our local authorities are. We are hovering at around 20 out of all English local authorities. We go up and down a little bit on that. And you can see, if you can, right on the left is poor old Tyneside, who are absolutely spiking. So all the authorities, the 5 authorities, top 5, are in the north, northwest or northeast at the moment. Next slide, please. This is the data graph. So the little bump on the left was wave 1. And the reason it's so small is because we were only testing in hospitals then. So what that's telling you is that's the hospital presentations that we were seeing. The second big peak was October. So that's when schools and universities went back. And then we dipped down mercifully just around Christmas and then went straight up again. And that is the sort of January, February peak. And then the one right on the right-hand side is where we are now, and continuing to rise. Now this is a slightly, this is the good news. And this is the basis upon which the government is making these decisions. So the green line are those peaks of infection. So that's wave 2 and wave 3. Wave 2, wave 3, and the current wave that we're seeing now. The red are hospitalizations. So you can see the first peak, which was mainly younger people. We didn't see the impact on hospitalizations. That's the October peak. That was mainly students and school children. It was mainly younger people. The second peak, you can see we saw a big spike in hospitalizations. That's because after Christmas, the age profile changed quite dramatically. And the third one, that green line is going to continue to go up. There are no mitigations that we have at our disposal that will stop that. We are just about to see the impact of the Euros over the next week or two, and the national modelling suggests that won't flatten until probably late August. But right at the bottom, you can see where hospitalisations are. The red one is people in hospital, and the blue one are people in intensive care. Now, that you can see that's broken the link between cases and hospitalisations, but not completely. So what that red line at the moment is telling us is we've got around, I think, 55, 60 people in hospital, and around 10 people in intensive care. And the national modelling, CMO, has suggested that he's seeing a doubling rate about every 10 days. So it's about every fortnight. So if we're 50 cases in hospital today, in a fortnight we'll be in 100 cases in hospital, and another fortnight we'll be 200. So you can see how quickly that situation changes and puts pressure on our NHS, which is pressure not just dealing with COVID, but then dealing with the NHS has been trying to deal with all the backlogs and to get back to business as usual. So it's creating a great deal of pressure. Next slide, please. This is a final just summary, really. The The position is the virus is still circulating. 19th of July or not, this virus is here. We have got higher rates than we've ever seen, and we expect this to continue. All that the 19th of July means is we're moving to a position of sort of community and personal and organisational responsibility. And last week we took a We Are Bristol position. I'm not sure if we've circulated that, Dan, but make sure that we do circulate it. We're just working on the comms last week. There was a comms position went out. It's a cross-party position. Actually, Tim sits on our group, so you may want to say something, Tim. But I think that's been a huge strength in dealing with this, that the city has come together, stood shoulder to shoulder. We are the city of protest, no doubt. There will be a significant, number of people who will see this as about liberty and freedoms. Actually, unless we continue to manage our behaviours, none of us are free, and particularly those who are most vulnerable are certainly not free and are very concerned and anxious. So the Bristol position is that we continue to wear masks out of courtesy to others, we continue to make space. All of the big institutions of the city have sort of signed up to that. We will keep our foot on the gas in terms of vaccination and testing programmes, and we're providing a lot of advice to businesses, events and venues, and including the nightclubs who opened up last night. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that briefing. Now, we haven't got very long for questions, but we do have time to take 2 or 3 questions if people have any burning questions. I'm looking around the room. Did anyone have a... Oh, yeah, I see Tim Rippington first.
Thanks, Christine. Well, 2 very quick questions. Do we know what the R rate is for the Delta variant? Because I think the original one was about 3. And does the fact that it's obviously got a much higher R rate, we're hearing about the Beta variant now and the fact that might avoid vaccines more, but does the fact that the Delta variant's got a higher R rate mean that it will keep the Beta variant down and stop that sort of having a real impact? That was one question. The other question was about the strategy, that the government obviously put that strategy in place before we really learnt about the Delta variant. Has there been any change to that strategy as a result of discovering a much more transmissible variant or not?
Thanks. I'll take the second question first. No, when the strategy was put in place, the Delta variant was well known and was dominant. So that was known. The strategy has been rolled out because the vaccine programme has so far proved effective against all strains, or certainly the variant and the Delta variant and most other strains. It is the case that if the Delta variant is out competing other strains, then it's a kind of known entity. The R rate is higher than 3, so the transmissibility. I should think it's about between 6 and 10. Yeah, so it's much more. The Alpha variant was the variant that caused the January peak, and it was about 60% more transmissible than the original variant, and the Delta variant is about 70% more transmissible than the Alpha variant. Yeah, so it's And did you? There's another question.
I just said, will it keep the Beta variant out?
With the Beta variant, yeah. So so far that seems to be the case, but local and global surveillance is very much about new variants. So when you see the term variant of concern, VOC, or variant under investigation, the reason it's under investigation or of concern is simply because it will cause more harm. And likely that there's some risk that it might evade the immune system. But to date, the scientists who are working with the vaccines have been very confident that they're able to stay ahead.
Thank you. Councillor White. Oh, covered. Were there any other questions from any? Oh, yes, Councillor Bales. Oh, and then I'll come to you, Judith.
Today is obviously Freedom Day, or, well, it's up to you whether whether you isolate or, you know, whatever, follow the guidelines. But all what we've just seen on the screen seemed really scary, and the opposite happening. So are we going to have any more lockdowns? You know, September, Christmas, January? How gone is it?
So all that's happened today, and if you can help get this message out, because I think everybody's really confused, you know, it's been talked about in all different ways. If you can help get this message out, all that has happened today is the law around this has come off. Nothing else has changed. The virus is still around, the risks are still there, and we need a bit more time to get the vaccination programme out before we're really stable. So the Bristol position, and it's an advisory position because we can't do this legally, is no change. Please continue to wear your mask. Please continue to be considerate of others. Continue to make space. Be aware of people who are vulnerable, all the things that we've been doing. And most of the institutions of the city have signed up to that. It will be very challenging for public-facing, you know, shops, and what we don't want to do is encourage conflict situations. So we're retaining our marshals, encouraging and educating rather than enforcing.
Thank you. And finally, Judith Brown, did you have something?
Yes, we're expecting a booster programme, and it's likely, we're waiting for the detail, but I think it's likely that the booster programme will be linked to the flu programme. So all of the people who are eligible for the flu vaccine will be eligible for the booster. But we've not had any official information yet. But yeah, that's I would expect that. Yeah.
Oh, a quick one then, Councillor Stone.
Yeah, just a quick one. Do you know the timescale for when everybody or people in Bristol are going to be double vaccinated? Because it seems to me that from the graphs that we just saw, that you can see that there isn't the hospitalisation if we are double vaccinated.
Yeah, thanks. We should have most people through their second vaccine by September. There are a number of sort of rate limiting factors: the supply of the vaccine, whether people, you know, come forward. We're doing a lot more pop-ups. I don't know if everybody saw, we had one in Primark. 500 people went through Primark, really diverse group, was very, very successful. So they're going to continue with that, and doing the one in Symes Avenue, one in Eastville Park. So we'll continue faith-based organisations. So we'll continue with that. But it's just time getting in. It takes time, you know, that 500 people, but that doesn't translate into a very big percentage when you're talking about 55%. So we just need time. But yeah, we should have most people through by September.
Thank you. Thanks for that update. I think, as you alluded to, I sit on the local engagement board along with some other councillors and community leaders, and they said there was quite a large discussion last Friday. And I mean, what was clear from that is, I think we would urge Bristolians to carry on as they were, to wear masks, especially if they're on public transport or going into a shop, an enclosed space, to continue to wash their hands, continue to give space. I mean, clearly the vaccine, masks, the vaccine, and then finally testing are our core weapons to try to slow down the spread. And if we can slow the spread, we can slow down the strain on the NHS. I think that's probably the worry, isn't it, is where will we be in 1 month's time? That's and the problem, as you've pointed out in your graphs, is we won't be able to stop it then, because the lead-in time between people going to hospitals, stroke the curve of infection we can see is sort of 3 or 4 weeks behind, and that is the problem we will face. So hopefully, and I have a lot of confidence in that the vast majority of Bristolians will take a precautionary principle, put their neighbours first, will continue to wear masks when they're going onto public transport or into a shop, will get the vaccine, and if they have not yet done it, now's a great time to go into any pop-up clinic and get a vaccine. If you're of any age, please, 18 plus, please now go get your vaccine. It does not hurt that much. I am a real coward when it comes to needles. I was surprised how easy it was. If I can go get it, anyone can go get it. And so I would urge people to do that. And then finally, testing. I mean, all of us today tested before we came here. I would urge people to test more frequently. I have noticed there's not much of a curve increase in lateral flow tests being registered anyway on the government website. It's about 5,000 a day in Bristol. So if people doubled, tripled, quadrupled the amount of testing they did, we could slow down the spread of the virus. Because every time someone tests positive and they isolate themselves, it sounds like to me they've stopped 6 to 10 other people potentially from being infected. So hopefully people will take that guidance now and use their sense to keep their neighbours and families safe. Anyway, thank you very much, Christina, and thank you for all the work you do. We know how busy you've been this last 18 months. So I'm afraid it looks like you're going to continue to be busy, I'm afraid.
Thanks. And just to say, I mean, it is absolutely a joint effort, and I appreciate how much everybody's doing, so thanks.
Oh, Councillor Stone, and we'll move to the next report. Yes.
The pop-up clinics, can you just possibly advise me how you get one organised, for example, a pop-up clinic?
If you email me, I'll put you in touch. So if anybody, if you have any questions or suggestions, just email. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9. This is the response to the independent review of Bristol's policies and actions for people with learning difficulties and autism. Hugh Evans is to introduce the report. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. You can hear me, can't you? I've got headphones on, but it makes it clearer. Right, evening, everybody. Nice to see so many people here. I'm the Exec Director of People in the Council, and I'm going to be talking about the Stephen Bubb report, and then more broadly, I think, about what we intend to do as a product of it. The report, Building Rights, was commissioned by the Council in conjunction with the Keeping Bristol Safe partnership in 2019. It was quite a lot longer in its development than was originally intended for obvious reasons that we've just been discussing. But I think that actually it was probably quite long overdue for Bristol, but also it reflects a situation, as has been described here this evening already, reflects a situation that I think is recognised as being problematic nationally. So we're very pleased in Bristol to have taken the initiative and to have gone down the line of getting this report produced by Sir Stephen. The first slide, if you're driving, Dan. Essentially, background-wise, I think we recognise, and Sir Stephen Bubb has highlighted some of the gross inequities that people with learning disabilities and autistic people experience, social disadvantage. And I think that as we have looked through the findings and thought about some of the experiences that we've had over the years working in the sphere, but also experiences that we've had as parents and as people who know people with learning disabilities and autistic people, is that this is as much a human and civil rights issue, a social justice issue, as it is about disability rights or rights for autistic people. And that's the case because, I think Marvin Rees, in describing it the other day, talked about it in the context of the same issues that people who are seeking refuge in the country experience, and the inequity and disadvantage that kids going through school who are in touch with the criminal justice system and never get a chance to get out of school without being deemed troublesome people experience. And so from his perspective, I think from our perspective with Bristol as a city of sanctuary, a city that is all about equality this gross inequality, this inequity, is something that we need to challenge. The report highlights how, as individual organisations, we don't do well for people with learning disabilities and autistic people. We work as individual organisations because working joined up is a very, very hard and problematic thing to do, but it's something that we need to learn to do, because when we work as individual organisations, we offer incomplete solutions, disjoints, and quite often that results in real disadvantage to the people that are subject to the services that we commission or deliver. We tend to manage crises through control rather than enabling people, and quite often that crisis management tends to result in people being sent to assessment and treatment facilities or placements outside of the area for long periods of time, and people don't necessarily get the opportunity to challenge or question those kind of approaches. Quite often people that we support are subject to the criminal justice system, and that's really also not geared up to offer progressive developmental support that can help people to improve their circumstances and get back onto the rails of something approaching what we would consider to be a normal life. It's said that anything between 30 and 50% of people in the criminal justice system, likewise 30 to 50% of people who are regularly rough sleeping or homeless, are people with learning disabilities or difficulties, autistic people, people with brain injury. Almost universally, people have issues of mental ill health, and also people have experienced traumatic times in their pasts that have created the situation that they're in now. So we, as a product of this report, we are committed to Sir Stephen's main challenge, which is that in order to be an autism-friendly city, Bristol and its partners in the region, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset, need to be more joined up. NHS, local authority, the criminal justice system, the DWP, and of course the really important independent voluntary and community sector services that are absolutely fundamental to the healthy communities that we need to engender in order to better support people with these kinds of needs. And we need to look at how we provide longitudinal support locally, bespoke to people's needs, and progressive, so that if people are in spike parts of their experience, if they're having a heightened level of anxiety or difficulty in their lives, that we can offer a progressive solution that helps. So we'll move on, Dan, if that's all right. So Stephen, as noted, he recognised these issues initially in his independent review of the Winterbourne View Hospital facility, which was published in 2014, although the issues about Winterbourne came to light in 2011, as you'll know, because there's just recently been a 10th anniversary of that. He recommended at the time that all such facilities should be closed and replaced with progressive community solutions. So Sir Stephen's been saying things like this for a decade, and rightly so. A number of the big NHS establishments have been rationalised or closed, most notably Coldstones in the northwest. But actually, we are still only probably, a tenth of the way down the line of developing those progressive community solutions, and there are still private hospitals that we, as local authorities in the country, very widely use. So Stephen makes it clear, as it says here, that we commit huge amounts of resource to inadequate approaches. I like to think sometimes we do the wrong thing as well as we can. And it's not witting or willful. This is just because we're used to working as individual organisations. But we could support our citizens in better and more cost-effective ways. And I think that he's very clearly saying in the report that Bristol actually, whilst having problems in this area, is not unusual nationally. Bristol's quite normal nationally. And he's says quite clearly as well that he's very enthusiastic about the leadership in Bristol, the political and the senior officer leadership, because he comments upon the fact that we've got real ambition to make a difference in this situation. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick, but Sir Stephen is enthusiastic about the fact that Bristol could be the groundbreaking place. Bristol could be the place where autism friendliness is something that we can proudly and correctly claim. He makes a range of recommendations in direct response to the experience of the stories, 3 family stories that are featured in the review. Charter of Rights, which we want to do that, certainly, although we have had conversations more broadly about human and civil rights, because you can have all sorts of charters of rights and they're only as good as people enacting the Charter of Rights. So what we're really keen on is having a bigger statement about human and civil rights. A simple and effective right to complain, so that when people feel marginalised about decisions made about them or made about their family members, that they've actually got an avenue to represent that, and an avenue that's clear of brambles and not overgrown, an avenue that's easy to navigate, because we are aware that people find it very difficult to penetrate the complexities of the system. And, as it says, to be specified, but some form of independent commissioner, some form of senior role over the whole system that works with the interests, with the Charter of Rights in mind, with the right to complain in mind, and works in the interests of the system, so that the system doesn't become governed by the challenges and priorities of individual organisations. So he's very clear on that, and we support those recommendations, and we welcome the report. So, as it says here, we want to follow up the report with, maybe aggressive is the wrong term to use, so I'll take that point on board, but we want to make a robust challenge to these experiences of people with learning disabilities, autistic people and their families, and the Mayor is behind this. The Mayor's sent out a letter to the city leaders and to the leaders of the key organisations and others in the voluntary and community sector at the end of last week as a call to arms, a rallying call to say we really need to and want to do something about this. And so we can make that letter available if anybody wants to see it. As it says here, we've done some good things, and we have made some progress, and we need to make more. I think the We Work for Everyone employment programme could be an excellent building block to support the development of work and work-related activities for people, so that people get an opportunity to do work activities alongside solutions around housing and other solutions that enable people to lead everyday community lives. We have got an autism diagnosis hub that's been set up in the period since the report was commissioned for children, and we need to do more work along those lines, potentially for adults too. And I'm very pleased to be able to note that whilst in this it says we're soon to hear about our Changing Futures bid, we have been successful in our Changing Futures bid. That's work to bring together parts of the system to work more effectively to support people who are on that kind of multiple disadvantage group, people who are prone to rough sleeping and homelessness, people who are prone to drug and alcohol use, people who are in touch with the criminal justice system, people, quite often care leavers, quite often people involved in sex work, etc. And as noted before, people with autism, learning disabilities and brain injuries are very highly represented in that group of people. So that's a starting point for us in regard to this system-wide approach. And happy to say that we've attracted over 3.3 million over the next 3 years to enable us to kickstart that. So that's very positive. Beyond that, I need to just note that we are working across BNSSG on this under the Healthier Together programme, but I think it will develop in the fullness of time beyond it being a health and care transformation. I think this needs to be something that we do more broadly across the system, involving certainly most of the other aspects of the council, especially including housing. but also then out into the broader community. So, you know, the health and care elements will be initially overseen through the Healthier Together programme on learning disabilities and autism, but we'll move beyond that. Just finally to note that we really are committed to the idea of working very closely with people to build in a kind of strong lived experience approach. I know we always say this, and it's a very, very hard thing to achieve, but we want to actively develop working relationships with people so that we can meaningfully, properly do what we call co-production. Awful cliche, but at the end of it, it's about giving people some ownership of the development so that it's not always prescribed activity by people in City Hall. This should be developed through people that experience services and their families. We mean it when we say we're going to do that. We can always improve, so however hard we try to do that, there'll always be scope for improvement, but that, I think, as an abiding memory is something that I'd like you to take away. We are going to be wanting to talk to people about the ways in which we can achieve that meaningfully. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I think also we've got Rosie Shepherd present as well from the CCG, is that correct? Looking around, maybe we don't. No, oh no, she's not here, I've been told. Okay, that's fine. Commission members, does anybody have any questions or points they would like to make? Okay, first I'll go Councillor Gollop, then I'll go Councillor Bales, then I'll go around and get some more hands.
Thank you, Chair. You know it's not my normal practice to be controversial, so I start off by apologising both to the Cabinet members and to Hugh, because I didn't realise until yesterday that this item was on the agenda, so I couldn't forewarn you of the comments I was going to make. But I had some real concerns reading all of this, and probably my fault, but I had not read the case studies in the BUB report until I looked at them and saw that. And I felt embarrassed and I felt concerned because the significance of what we'd got wrong in those cases was huge. And if we look at the public forum statements today on other issues relating to special needs as well, there are things we're still not getting right. So I have a concern about that, but I have a concern about how we stop the problems happening. And you talk about those in the criminal justice system and those who are homeless. But actually, how do we stop those who are in a semi-stable situation from falling into becoming homeless and becoming part of the criminal justice system? Now, I read all this about a Charter of Rights and I think, oh, that's wonderful. And then I see we're going to have a commissioner and think, well, actually, that's a cost and what's that going to achieve? And then I look at the fact that the drop-in centres for adults with special needs have been closed and are not going to happen again. So actually, we're turning to adults who need some form of social interaction other than their one-to-one care support, being told that that can't happen anymore, and being told that the only support they'll be given is to have 6 weeks of a session to prepare them for something, and then they're on their own. Now, you're talking of people who actually aren't able to arrange meetings and gatherings themselves and to make things happen. And the authority has withdrawn that level of social support. And so I have a real concern that what I see here is what we're aiming to do is not actually what we're delivering in the policy that's in practice at the moment. And that doesn't seem to me that it's a policy that anyone wants to happen, because it doesn't fit in with any of the words I've heard expressed by officers or cabinet members. So I just have a real concern that we may be spending money on a bureaucracy when actually that money could be funding some drop-in centres that could actually be taking people who are troubled and giving them the opportunity to meet and have support and counselling that could stop them from falling into the criminal justice system. So I just fear that we are getting this very seriously wrong. So I really just want to register my concerns. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. I'll take 2 sets of questions at once, just to give you a chance then to reply to both. So Councillor Bales next.
This all sounds really amazing, A lot of it should already be happening. The law was changed a very long time ago, and we just haven't seen it. As Public Forum said, there's no accountability. You know, I've been in the system nearly 4 years now, and I've seen no difference. It's still very much a you'll do as you're told or else system. And when I say or else, I mean or else. It is awful. You know, that my son was thrown into a car park at 5 years old. He was locked in an office for being autistic. This report talks about abusing care homes. That's happening in our schools, under our noses. And when we complain about it, we are lied about. There is no accountability. What consequences are there if none of this happens? You know, it can't go on as it is. You know, this is our children. You know, what consequences are there? You know, the people who abused autistic people in care homes went to prison. You know, when are our children going to get justice? You know, when is there going to be some consequences?
Thank you, Councillor Bales. Did you want to respond to those 2 points? Then I'll ask for more. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the and sympathise, you know, with the concerns that you raise, and I hope that you recognise that this, in its way, is a recognition of those same concerns, because we haven't got it right at the moment, and I think that the issues that you're raising, one way or the other, and I can't speak about issues like that you've raised, Councillor Bales, because I don't really know any of the background to it, but one thing I will say is, in general, the issues that you raised are the issues that we want to address. So there are lots of different ways that we consider, for example, how we stop semi-stable people getting into the criminal justice system, but one of the key ways that I think we need to look at is to stop doing crisis-driven episodic responses and to start looking at long-term relationships and support for people, so that we can support people over the longer term, to build capacity in things like employment-orientated services and support, and to build capacity to support people to live independently in their own accommodation, or in accommodation that suits them and any carers that they may have, to improve the capacity for social interaction. I have to say that the drop-in centres example, again, is troubling, but it's been a really difficult time to provide activities where people can all get together, because in regard to the drop-ins in Bristol, we haven't been, and quite a lot of day services, we haven't really been able to open them due to infection control. But I think, you know, I have to agree that we're not delivering to the aspirations that are in the Bubb report, or to the aspirations that I've highlighted that we have at the moment, and that we really need to do quite a lot of work in order to up our game in that respect. So I fully accept that point.
If it's okay, I think Councillor Gopp, you wanted to quickly just come back, and then I'll call for some more questions.
Yeah, Hugh, I'm sorry to sort of put you on the spot, and I don't expect an answer now, but of course the drop-in centres couldn't happen during lockdown, but at the end of lockdown, the explanation is that the funding is stopped and was taken out of the budget because they weren't going to be used anymore, and is therefore not part of the authority's offer. And my point is that if the only support that's given is one-to-one through support, that's great, because it's inevitably better that people are living in the community than they are living in institutions. So I have no problem with that. But actually, their human rights to actually have a social gathering with other people where they can interact, rather than only ever being one-to-one with a paid care worker, I think is fundamental. And yet, as an authority, we've said, no, that can't happen anymore. And it's back to the usual issue that the authority could be the facilitator to make those things happen. The individuals can't. So it worries me that we are not responding and not reacting. But Chair, can I just digress, because I don't expect you'll let me back a third time, and just say on a separate issue, having heard Councillor Bale's comments, if you're looking for a subject for a task and finish group this year, can I just put that very highly up the list, because it's not the first time I've heard a parent with that level of emotion about what they're going through. And I really do urge that we look at finding that, and perhaps it can be part of the process of looking at the Charter and the rights and what needs to happen to make this work, because it's unacceptable that any parent in Bristol should be having those levels of trauma.
Thank you. And then next on my list, I've got Councillor Stone, then Councillor Rippington.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points, actually, if that's okay. Having looked through the report, I noticed on page 3 that there is, in the actual report itself, that there is this concern with services that aren't getting involved, and I think they quote the British Transport Police and the Independent Office of Police Complaints. I just wanted to find out whether or not, how can you ensure that all services get involved with this very important piece of legislation or policy change? Shall I do my second point? Or and my second point is actually similarly to what's been discussed here, is that this report is fantastic in its rhetoric, but I hope it's not just rhetoric. I think we do need a clear action plan. I really do, and I think we need some bullet points of how we're going to get to these outcomes, because it will be a real shame if we talk the talk, but we can't walk the walk.
Thank you. And Councillor Rippington, do you want to just add yours, and then you can perhaps respond to both? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, well done, Bristol, for commissioning this report. You know, we've known for a long time that autism is a condition that isn't fully recognised, and the way people are treated within all sorts of systems, not just within the council, but within health services, within the police, needs to be addressed. So first question is, I can't believe that we're the only city in Britain that's thought about this and is doing this. So is there anybody else that's doing this and is further ahead that we can work with to see what they've already done? If there isn't, then shocking for the country as a whole. The second question is about the independent commissioner role. I imagine this would be a funded role, and absolutely crucial would be how much power that role would have. I would assume that funding would come from across the different services, so not just the Bristol City Council, but, as I say, health services and other services that are currently failing autistic people. So would that be a paid role? Would it be multi-disciplinary funded? And how much power would that person have? Would they have as much power as Commissioner Gordon, for instance, to be able to leap in? And actually, when people have got problems, will they be able to go to the Commissioner and say that these are my problems, and he will then, or she will then be able to intervene? Is that what's envisaged? Because if it's just a talking role, then I don't see a lot of point in it. And finally, Hugh, you mentioned the DWP, who are, I would say, the biggest criminals in this whole setup in Gotham. They're obviously a national body. Do we have any influence? Would we be able to have any influence at a city level on the DWP to sort out their act? Because I know that the stress that they cause families with autism is absolutely horrendous. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think Commissioner Gordon had another benefit up his sleeve that could be invoked. We haven't sadly got a Batman at the moment. Maybe that's something for the independent commissioner to consider. To start with the independent police complaints and the British Transport Police question, yes, Sir Stephen was critical of those two elements, although, as I noted before, very positive about certain other, contributors. We have followed up with the British Transport Police, especially the police complaints thing less so, but we have got Mike Jackson and I a conversation pending with the Chief Exec of the British Transport Police. So we will be discussing the shortfalls of their response according to the report. Although, having said that, I think they argue that there is a civil case underway pertaining to one of the cases in the report, and so that would have been the reason why they didn't respond. But we will certainly follow that up, because safeguarding can only work if all of the participants are really engaged and respond to each other and hold each other to account. So that's quite important. In regard to action plans, there are a range of intentions, but it's, I mean, if we're going to get this right, this is going to be huge, and it's going to take place over, you know, a number of years. We're not going to be able to fix a systemic set of problems that have developed over 40 years in 6 months. And half of the problem with action plans, especially those that are kind of checkbox ones that you quite often get across the country for such issues like the autism plan, is that people tend to work to the plan rather than work to find the solution to the issues. We know that we want to do a lot of work to develop relationships so that we can properly co-produce, looking at recognising people's lived experience, families and people that use services. Changing futures is going to be a real big one for us, because that's going to give us the opportunity to really start experimenting with some whole system work. So, and thankfully we've got that funding, so that's going to finance us to do that for some groups of people who, as noted, will feature people with learning disabilities and autistic people. We want to talk to service providers in the country to find out who's doing what in different places, and to maybe bring them in so that we can start to specify what kind of services we'd like to develop here, to, you know, develop the market here, so that we don't rely on services that are in other places, that we can develop services at home in Bristol, so that if we are spending good amounts of money to support people with high-level needs, we're spending it in Bristol, and we're developing a Bristol workforce that's best in the country, rather than spending it in other parts of the country. I think there's a lot of potential in the integrated care work and the development of integrated care partnerships, 3 of which are developing in Bristol as we speak, and I think there's a lot of potential through those, and I know that Councillor Holland's very keen on looking at how members can really get plugged in to integrated care partnerships, developing community capability, because we know that 10% of health and well-being is to do with clinical services, but 90% of health and well-being is about everything else that happens in people's communities and in their lives and supports them. And as I noted before, employment support, neighbourhood development, housing, all of those kinds of things to enable people to have better opportunities. So our action plan will be big, and it will be built around those particular elements of activity.
Could I bring Councillor Holland then? I know you wanted to say something. I'll come back if I can. I'm running quite low on time, that's all.
Thanks very much, Tim, but I didn't want to take any members of the Commission time, but there's just a couple of things that I did want to stress. And of course, there'll be many of the same issues that are raised in this report that are in the next one, won't they, about SEND. But in answer to Tim Rippington's question about is Bristol, you know, well done for us commissioning it, but are we the only people? And you might be aware, and certainly we can send to Dan and he can circulate it, but the Health and Social Care Committee of the House of Commons have also done a report, and the report is called The Treatment of Autistic People and People with Learning Disabilities, and the subtitle is Ensuring Autistic People and People with Learning Disabilities Live Independent, Free and Fulfilled Lives, and their conclusions are very similar about the services, or the disjoint in services has consistently let people down over the last, you know, however many decades, really, not just years. I do want to stress about the importance of getting the Changing Futures money. So it's over £3 million, and you know our bid was commended not only by our partners but also by the funders, MHCLG and the lottery. but I don't want people to think, oh, good, we've got the money and we're going to start that work, because actually the bid was based very much on work that started, well, some of it has been ongoing, but particularly the experience of COVID and people, homeless people, rough sleepers, and people's experience during COVID and how that's been supported by local organisations. Hugh's just mentioned the issue about the emerging NHS new structures and the importance of the localities. And a lot of people, you know, I'm looking around this room, and there are organisations in people's communities which we already know do a huge amount to support people with learning disabilities and people with mental health needs and autistic people in those communities, places like the Greenway, Windmill Hill, City Farm, all of those kinds of organisations. And we want to boost that work. So although I hear what Jeff said, and I want to kind of get a picture for that a bit more about what you've actually, or what Bernice has been actually told, just to make sure that we're not stopping one thing without establishing other stuff that's going to support those people. And then my last point is really a kind of question for your commission about the recommendation from Sir Stephen about the independent commissioner, because I agree with you, Jeff, and it's not our proposal, it's his. And how independent can a commissioner be if they're only looking at Bristol? Should we be looking at working with our partners across the CCG footprint, Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloss, about having an independent commissioner who oversees the services across the piece, because some of them are very specialist services that will only be for a couple of people, potentially in each of the authorities. So is that where the independent commissioner should be? Or should we actually be making the case for an independent commissioner at national level? Because if we take the second of the recommendations about a right to complain, then hopefully some of the issues that would have gone to a commissioner will be headed off at that, because we are undertaking to take those complaints seriously. And just finally, I know Hugh's already mentioned it, but Jen, you said we shouldn't have used the word that we're going to go for this aggressively, but I do hope that what we've said about the commitment to getting this right and putting the building blocks in place to get it right. And remember, my responsibility is adults, but we'll be talking about the SEND in a minute. It might have been the wrong word to use, but nevertheless, that is the intention, is to really, really go for this and put those pieces in place in the future.
Thanks. Councillor Stone, you wanted to come back very quickly, and then I got time to perhaps take one more question from another councillor.
I just wanted to come back very quickly. I'm referring to the People's Scrutiny Commission report, page 27, and I'd just like to refer to the statistics there. And I think sometimes these statistics are so disappointing that I think the timescale that you're describing, surely we can't leave vulnerable people, you know, without these policies or change of policies or ideas for any longer than we need to. And this is what I'm actually really trying to get to the point of, is these particular statistics. Disabled women are over 5 times more likely to have experienced sexual assault in the last year. And I think we can't leave these people hanging around while we try to decide whether or not we want to write a plan or don't write a plan, and whether the plan is good enough or not good enough.
Thank you. And Judith, I think you wanted to come in briefly.
Oh, that one's come on good. Yes, I just wanted to say that I'm delighted to hear you're thinking about co-production, because it's a total change from what's gone on before. Before, we've said this is what the council's got, you can have a bit if you qualify. Co-production, something entirely different. It's turning to people and saying, what is it you think will work, and how can we make it happen? And I have here details of a toolkit which the 14 cities which got the lottery money 7 years ago have been working together, and we've worked on this, and we have a toolkit which I think you'll find invaluable. Please do look at it and use it. I'll pass this up to you, because we can't go on letting people down. As long as I've been coming here, and that's what, 15, 20 years is it, I've heard there's no communication, or there's the wrong communication, or there's no information, or there's the wrong information. And meanwhile, children are growing up.
Thank you. Was there any other final questions from panel members? And then I'll just ask Hugh to perhaps finally come back. No. Okay, so Hugh, if you come back to that, I think one of the key issues people have raised is they want to see a detailed action plan sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely accept that point. But I want to qualify it to an extent. Firstly, also I'd like to say, because I don't think I explicitly said it, and I know that Helen did, and I know that Alison will as well in the next section, is that we really are thinking about this from a life course perspective. So this isn't just about adults, and it does read across, but Councillor Holland said that anyway, so I just wanted to reiterate that. Yes, the stats that are in the report are glaring and stark and eye-opening, and I know because I sourced them myself and put them in the report myself. I put them in there because I'm as troubled as you are about them. I urge people, though, not whilst and on a day-to-day basis, our social workers and our people in our schools, etc., are tackling these very issues as well. But I urge people not to look for quick fixes. As Helen said, it's been decades in the making, this situation. There's a range of reasons for it that we could go through over a long conversation, but it's been decades in the making, and measured and proper responses are necessary, because quick fixes, in my experience doing this kind of work, are rarely terribly effective. We're talking system change across the life course, and potentially over an area that's larger than our city. And so consequently, we want to do it right, and we want to do it properly.
Sorry, Chair, is it possible for me to come in as well and just add to that?
It is, but I can't say who's speaking.
Oh, sorry,
yes,
it's me.
Sorry, Alison, right,
sorry,
yeah.
I've been waving for a while.
Far away.
No, not at all. Just really to add a bit more context, obviously, to Councillor Bell's comments and report about her own child. And obviously, I can't report. I can't comment on that individual case. Two things. One, just to really offer up, from a safeguarding perspective, a follow-up conversation with Councillor Bells from some of those things you mentioned. Obviously, you know, that's potentially very serious, and I'd want to know the detail of that. But secondly, I mean, in terms of that life course, and although we will be touching on elements of this in relation to the Alternative Learning Review and, you know, specialist provision in the second Education and Skills paper, really a lot of what we've heard in terms of that early identification and support, making sure that we understand what children and young people need at the earliest point, and trying to stop that escalation is a really strong theme and a big part of the work that's taking place in response to the SEND inspection that happened in 2019. So the written statement of action, which we've obviously been working towards for the last 12 to 15 months, has some very, very clear milestones around these particular areas, and part of that sort of wider workforce development, making sure that we have an understanding in our schools and settings of how to meet the needs, how to include our young people more successfully, is definitely some of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve through that written statement of action. However, in the same breath, I would say that obviously it is going to take time to embed, and it won't necessarily change some of the experiences our young people have had in recent years.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm aware that we're all getting very, very hot. So I think we'll have a 5-minute break so people can go get a drink and perhaps deheat. Please remember to put a mask on if you're standing up and moving around. We'll be back here in sort of 5 or 6 minutes, everybody, to carry on. Thank you. you. I'll let the officers find their seats. Right. We're not allowed to draw the curtains. Can I just suggest you find an unoccupied seat you're allowed to sit in and move? Because we're not allowed to draw the curtains because that's the very limited airflow, which is our main anti-COVID measure. Yeah, there are vacant seats back on this side. There's also some vacant seats actually over there which are in the shade, so feel free to move now and find yourself a vacant seat where you're not in the sun. Right. Okay, thank you everybody. I think we all needed a bit of a break because of that heat. So, next up, I think we're on agenda item number 10, which is response to the Bristol Alternative Learning Provision Review Report. Alison, do you want to introduce that? Say 5-7 minutes, and then we'll open it to questions. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor Kent. And just to introduce a colleague who's joining me, Rachel Pryor, who's Head of Service for Inclusive City, and will support the discussion following the presentation. So I haven't got a slide pack. I just wanted to pull up some of the salient points from the report that you've already received. So this is a review of Bristol's alternative provision, and it took place in the autumn term. And just to reiterate the fact, it was an independent report, so we did commission somebody independent of the council to undertake the report. Obviously, the actual review itself took place during COVID, so there were some restrictions in terms of the interviewing, but the majority of the work was able to take place. In terms of the approach to the use of alternative provision, obviously the key outcome is that we ensure as a city that we use alternative provision for the best outcomes of our children and young people. And when we refer to alternative provision, what we mean is the education that's provided outside of mainstream provision. And these are for children and young people who have either been excluded or at risk of exclusion, or for those whom mainstream education is inappropriate in some way, and obviously that can be very individualised. But it also includes children and young people who are unable to attend due to health reasons as well. So it's an extremely comprehensive report, and obviously we've already referenced it a couple of times this evening, because it does link to some of those wider system pieces in terms of reform and improvement. So this is, for me, this was the missing part in that sort of system-wide piece. So I very welcome the report, and I welcome the detail that comes with it. There are 31 recommendations that have been made in the report, and actually in terms of the action planning, we've adopted an additional one linked to hospital education. So there are 32 recommendations in total outlined in the action plan, and within the report, obviously we've set that out into 8 clear themes that require addressing. So in terms of that scrutiny report, you've got the key area of focus for all 8 themes, and in the appendices, apologies for the amount of paperwork that came with this report, you do have the full report that we received as a council. You also have a copy of the draft action plan, and just to say that is the first iteration of the action plan, and it needs to be developed, so it's not a finished piece. But you also have details about the co-production summary. So that's the route to co-production, which outlines how we intend to develop the action plans in this report. And that is through, as I think I've already mentioned in one of the questions, that's through co-production with children and young people, our families, our partners and key stakeholders, but also very much about those, as I said, who have experienced the alternative provision in Bristol and have that lived experience that they can contribute to. So in relation to scrutiny, so I've given particular emphasis on 2 areas that I think will be of most interest, and that's our use of alternative provision in relation to children and young people with SEND, and I think part of the conversations we've already had this evening, that for me is a key focus, and something there is obviously a lot of opinion and passion about as well, so that's appropriate. And then the link between alternative providers and schools is the other area I think of scrutiny that will be of particular interest, so I pulled those 2 issues out. So it's clear from the report itself that there's a high usage of alternative provision in Bristol, and there's a high usage of alternative provision in Bristol for children and young people with SEND. So those may be children and young people who already have an education, health and care plan, or those that are coming into our alternative provision with unmet needs. This strongly links to the work, as I've said previously, that's being addressed through our SEND written statement of action, which we've been working towards for the last 12 to 18 months, and particularly in relation, as I said earlier, to that early identification and support, so that we're creating a clear pathway for our children and young people, particularly for those with social, emotional and mental health, and you'll have seen quite a few references to that in the Fuller report. So this is about getting in earlier and also to the wider specialist provision strategy, which is about making sure we have the right provision in the right places of the city that our children and young people can access. This will enable us to move to a model where alternative provision is used appropriately. And I think one of the clear themes that come out of this is where alternative provision is working in a city, it's a revolving door provision. So it's being utilised and targeted at a specific point in that young person's learning journey and education, with a view that actually that young person either transitions onto the right provision for long-term education or back into mainstream provision. And that's obviously an issue that we need to address through this report. So we've got to focus on providing in-reach support to improve inclusion and reduce the need for exclusion, and supporting schools to meet the emerging needs without that need for placement changes. And this really comes through strongly. So in terms of the development of the action plan, we will be taking place over the coming months, and the co-production commitment really outlines how that's going to happen. We've co-produced and co-owned the action plan, and the plan's going to identify the key milestones for delivering the system improvements that are required. So it will feel, and it does look already, very, very similar to the written statement of action in terms of clear actions, clear milestones, and how we're going to hold ourselves and each other to account in terms of reaching those. As with the SEND written statement of action, what was a very useful process for us was using Scrutiny and the comments and the feedback through the Scrutiny channel to actually feed into the action plan itself. So officers in the room are going to be listening very carefully to some of those key themes and ambitions that you'll be posing tonight, and we can then make sure that that's reflected through. So again, similar to the written statement of action, we can use Scrutiny as a sort of feedback loop to some of that process as well.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up now to Commission members. Are there any questions or points people would like to make? Yes, Councillor Bales, and then Councillor Townsend, then Councillor Massey.
Obviously, we all know that a lot of money is being spent on alternative provision. And when I say a lot of money, I mean a lot of money, like massive amounts of money. My own son has been out of school for 3 years. That's longer than he was ever in school. You know, that's ridiculous. That's just awful. How dare that school do that to my son? So my question is, you know, that's a lot of money. How much additional costs? You know, my own son's tutor, I have no idea who he works for. He's not on the list of recommended alternative providers, or you know, so how much more money has been spent without us knowing? You know, this seems like a tiny drop in the ocean. You know, why are schools allowed to get away with this?
Thank you. Should we take questions in pairs, just so I can get through as many as possible? So Councillor Townsend next.
I just want to draw other members' attention to a few things. What's quite concerning for me in this is the point of setting up the kind of the hub that they were speaking about for alternative provision was to reduce the level of permanent exclusion. So whilst over the last few years other previous members might have been watching the levels of permanent exclusion reduce, the actual experiences for our children on the ground have not changed, because exclusion is exclusion, whether that child's been permanently excluded or whether they've been moved to an alternative learning provider. So I just want to say that the experience for families are going to be the same. the difference between what the council's paying from the high needs budget for some of these alternative providers compared to others is something that we really need to be drilling down on and understand how it came to be that some providers are being paid nearly twice as much for basically providing the same provision, and where that comes from. I find that really very disturbing, that's not been picked up previously. You know, my final point about alternative provision is that Bristol's got one of the highest in the country. We had one of the highest permanent exclusion rates, and that's been translated into one of the highest alternative learning provision rates. This is an area that leads into the failed services for adults. They then go into the criminal justice system. They then get involved with the police. These are the very children that in a few years' time we were talking about half an hour ago in terms of the adult services. So this is where we need to be placing our focus if we actually want to make a difference generationally. Okay, thanks, that's all.
Thank you very much. Alison, did you want to come back on any of that, and then I'll get some more points of questions?
Yes, certainly. Just in terms of Councillor Bale's query about the funding, obviously there are different routes and different methods of funding alternative provision. A lot of it is commissioned directly from the local authority. Schools and settings can directly request provision and support, whether that's in-reach support into that school or setting, or whether it's actually an outsourced placement into one of the alternative learning providers. But particularly for those with education, health and care plans, obviously those resources and the finances are all captured within that individual child's resources, so that the funding isn't necessarily an unknown. And obviously in terms of the high needs block funding and the pressures in relation to funding more generally with SEND, that is the piece of work that we have started with regard to the Dedicated Schools Grant management plan, and that really pulls together that big wider system financial piece that obviously we are all keen to understand how we secure best value. And it is about best value. It's making sure that the money that we spend on our children with SEND across Bristol has the most impact that it can, and I think it's clear from the Alternative Learning Review report that there are significant weaknesses within that in terms of that value for money. So again, because we've got a 32 recommendation action plan that really starts to address this and looks to bring that financial parity, if you like, which Councillor Townsend has commented on, again, that piece of work being delivered, we absolutely welcome. So we have a much clearer picture of the finances, but also we have equitable commissioning across the system as well.
Thank you. Councillor Massey and then Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Chair. I was worried that there didn't seem to be an awful lot of joined-up working going on with allocating spaces to children and what was the appropriate outcome for them. Also, that the adequacy of the provision, how much is that checked and quality checked. And finally, towards the end, it said pupils were asked what, if anything, changed for them as a result of their learning, and 33% said nothing, which I find ridiculously unbelievable. If we're spending that amount of money and 33% are saying absolutely nothing's changed, there's something seriously wrong.
Thank you. And Councillor Gollop, do you want to put your point or question?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I must admit, first of all, slight concern when Alison had mentioned that there may be value for money issues, because when I hear an officer admitting there's value for money issues, I immediately think that that is an issue that needs attention, but I accept it is getting that attention. But this is not my specialist area, so I'm sort of trying to understand, and one of the public forum statements said that all these subjects were linked together tonight. I'm trying to understand the educational healthcare plans that are outstanding, presumably may identify some pupils needing special schools, some needing special treatment, and some needing alternative provision. Is that, am I right in that being the situation?
Yeah, so in terms of the education, health and care plans, obviously some of those young people sitting within the system, and we've got a paper on that goes into that in a little bit more detail, will require specialist provision. What needs to happen, if we have a really well-functioning system across Bristol, is in terms of those that require alternative provision or placement risk, that's very targeted at a specific point in time for that young person, that it's not linked to special educational needs, and it's not linked to having an education healthcare plan, because if we get the system right, we've got enough provision across the city in order to meet those variety of needs. So what we've got in our system at the moment is an over-representation of children with SEND in our alternative provision, because the rest of the system is still very much in that improvement phase. So getting it right means we have all of the right provision in the right place for that young person, so that as we identify escalating need, we've got the right provision for them.
So there is an assessment alternative to the educational healthcare plan, because what worries me is so there's 600 plans outstanding and we're dealing with them at 200 a quarter. Even if no more came in for the next 9 months, it would take 9 months to get up to date. And I still don't understand how we know that we've got the right assessment for those pupils until they've been assessed, and that remains a concern. You say there's a mechanism for picking them up, but I can't see how if a short-circuiting of the process can be done for alternative learning provision. I don't understand why it can't be done for special educational needs.
So in terms of the early identification and support for special education and needs, there's basically a school level provision called the ordinary available provision. So there is a notional amount of funding that our schools and settings across Bristol that means that the needs of those children, young people, are met at a school-based level, that it doesn't require statutory assessment and it doesn't require specialist provision. But we know for some of our individuals that actually that they need something that's enhanced to that, if you like. And that's where you then start the sort of the formal identification, the formal support process that leads to an education, health and care plan. You don't need that statutory assessment in order to access alternative provision, whether that's for a very short period of time, because there is maybe a placement breakdown, there's some specific work in relation to social, emotional, mental health that needs to happen. That is done in conjunction with the school, with the alternative provider, with the understanding that that young person then can go back into that mainstream setting. So getting a really flexible, responsive system across the city involves a number of different moving cogs, and it's why it's so complex, because everything interlinks and relates to each other. So that system reform that we've talked about is the key piece here.
Yeah, so final point on this one, Chair, if I might. I understand it's complex, and I don't envy anyone having to deal with it, but I also understand from comments made by constituents that they often find that the solution to a problem happens too late in the process, so that the solution is being found at short notice, at extra cost, to solve the particular problem, and that if it could have been addressed earlier in the process, it would be more satisfactory for the pupil. It would also be more efficient for the authority, and therefore, how do we address that resource issue? Is that being dealt with in this action plan to actually accelerate the way we respond to the challenges that are there?
So the answer is yes, that is exactly what the action plan is looking to do, and really dovetails into that wider written statement of action. I'm just looking to Rachel actually about any specific detail that might bring this to life.
Yeah, absolutely agree with the comments made about the use of ARP. And if you look at the draft commissioning strategy, which at the moment is out for consultation, it really talks about using ARP as a form of early intervention for those children who have got short-term trauma or short-term need, not using it as an alternative to SEND support. And one of the first categories in the report is about, and one of the first categories we've identified is to look closely to make sure that SEND and ARP are mutually supportive, not one rather than the other. And so we're looking at early intervention, so supporting children early with their from ALP providers to make sure that they are supported through blips or changes that may be happening in their lives that mean that they need that support on a short-term basis. If they then need to move into, and Alison talked about children on a revolving door system, move into ALP for a short time. It should be a short-term support mechanism. Moving into ALP, picking up Brenda's comment around the pupil voice, you know, those young people should be thriving if they're having that alternative and that money spent on them. That money should be value for money. And I know that, as I say, and as Alison has said, that Schools Forum are kind of looking at the value for money aspect there. And then that idea of leaving ALP, so that whole support and transition back to support a young person back into mainstream or to the right setting. So really focusing on transition, and that's sort of embedded in the commissioning strategy. And in terms of the point around joined up services, the way that the education and skills is now organised under Alison, we've brought together a lot more joint working. There's a lot less silo working, and in my area, Inclusive City, looking very much at attendance, safeguarding, working with our colleagues in social care, using education welfare in terms of a supportive mechanism and supporting those most vulnerable learners. We're not there yet, you know, and that's why we need to focus our energies in education and skills on this piece of work. We're working on the belonging strategy, which is the core part of the belonging strategy is every citizen from birth through to you know, their family life and their communities feels a sense of belonging. So we're working very closely with schools and settings in terms of developing inclusive cultures in schools, and we've produced a document around relationship-based support for schools that we're currently sort of rolling out training and support on. So there's lots of kind of pieces of work that kind of link together mean that we're developing this piece of work, but we're not there yet, which is why we've had to focus our energies with these quite number of recommendations in the reports.
Councillor Tim Rippington, I think you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. I think we have to be aware this has been going on for a very long time. I've been in the system since 2005, and there weren't enough school places then, and a lot of the work that needed to be done hasn't been done for a long time. So I'm actually really pleased to see these reports coming here today, because it seems to me that for the first time we're starting to get a bit of a joined up approach to all this. We're starting to join the dots up. We're starting to see how alternative learning provision is being used because there's not enough SEN, and SEN hasn't been plotted out how many places we need before, and we're going to see later on that looks like that's finally happened. So I think this is really positive stuff that we're reading here, and a lot of this has been known for a long time, but it's really good to see it written down and an action plan to finally get past words, if you like. There's one thing I wanted to ask, which is going even one step further back in the process. You were talking here about fixed term exclusions from secondary schools, and it mentions the ready to learn policy, which gets described in here as zero tolerance, or other words that are slightly nicer. But is there a marked difference in the way that different schools within our authority, and I know they're not local authority schools anymore, is there a difference in the way that schools operate this policy, and is there any data to show whether it's linked to performance, i.e. are some schools using this as a way of moving children out of their school who drag down their performance statistics and get them out quicker than perhaps some other schools do, who aren't as fixated on their position as a school. I know that sounds a bit judgmental, but I think that's the way a lot of people would see it.
Yes, thanks for drawing attention to that. It's something that we are looking at through the piece of guidance that I was talking about, which is the relationships and belongings guidance. So that's about encouraging schools to see behaviour as communication rather than defiance or those sort of words. So and also looking at evidence bases. So where schools are using particular policies such as Ready to Learn, to really look at their own evidence base for that and whether it's working, because actually exclusion as a sanction doesn't actually change anything for that young person. In fact, if anything, it can have a negative impact because it can damage that young person's self-esteem. It can get them out of a habit of being in school, and for all of the kind of reasons around safeguarding, it's not necessarily a strategy that changes or supports change in behaviour for that young person. However, some schools are quite keen on the Ready to Learn approach. I think zero tolerance is exactly the wrong wording for schools, and many of them have tolerance as a value. So it's around encouraging schools to look at the evidence base, to develop trauma-informed and relationship-based positive regard for their young people, and to be curious about what is going on for that young person, to involve help early if there is support needed. But yes, to really try and encourage schools to think clearly about the evidence base for the programme that they're using, and to see whether it's working, and to make sure that other things aren't going on in terms of sanctions and rewards that are negative for children and young people, such as, and we don't have a lot of data on this at the moment, but schools would have their own data around those internal exclusions, so exclusions that happen that we wouldn't necessarily have recorded as an external exclusion, but when a child is actually missing out on learning. So that's another layer of inclusive practice that we're trying to move away from.
And I think, sorry, just to add into that as well, just to answer your question, there are a number of different approaches used across the city, and you know, some more successful than others, and there's some really good practice as well taking place. So part of the working that we're doing is to really identify where we are seeing that success, and looking to share that best practice amongst school and settings, so that we actually learn from each other as well. And so the kind of commitment that we have as a sector is part of that cultural change piece as well, and sharing best practice is definitely part of that. So it's very much something that has started. There's a lot of different components to it. What we don't have is the mandate to insist on a particular approach as a local authority.
Thanks. We're beginning to run out of time, but if I can ask briefly, Councillor Godwin, then Councillor Bales. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I won't take long at all. I just want to sort of summarise from my point of view some of this, really. I've been for a long time really concerned about alternative learning, as Alison will know, and I think I really welcome this report because it enables us to have a clear set of recommendations. But there are some things that I've sort of pulled out of it that are particularly concerning. I think, as Alison's already said, the finance and the value for money element of it. I don't think that's as clear at the minute as it needs to be, and I know we're working hard to understand exactly what's costing what, and you know what the value for money is, and what the kind of impact on the young people is. I'm deeply concerned about the correlation between alternative learning, children with SEND, and children that are known to social care as well. It just feels like if you sort of look at a Venn diagram of our most vulnerable children, that the crossover between SEND, being out of mainstream education, and having sort of social care input is, you know, that there's a huge crossover. And I feel like if we could approach those young people in a kind of more holistic way and think about those services and those interventions, we could help them to have better outcomes. I'm also concerned about, as Brenda pointed out, the outcomes for some of our young people going into ALP. and the fact that, you know, it's supposed to be a kind of intervention that maybe takes a child out of an environment for a short amount of time and enables them to come back in, and that's not happening. We're sort of seeing too many young people go out of mainstream school at years sort of 8, 9, 10 and not come back. And I've had conversations with young people that have moved multiple times. I've had a really enlightening and engaging conversation with a young person who was first moved out because Ready to Learn failed. You know, he didn't fit into Ready to Learn, and it struck me then that it's schools that need to bend towards children, not children having to bend towards schools. And I think that's a real issue. And I think we have to manage that in a way that we have to accept that most of our schools are academies, that we have to work with academies, we have to co-produce with academies, and we have to understand how we get to a point where we're not seeing so many of our young people, many of whom are perhaps in families where there's some chaos and there's not maybe the most secure environment, then having to face rejection essentially, or to lose their second most secure place, the school, really early in their lives. And I cannot understand how we could ever justify that, to be quite honest with you. I don't understand how we can take that away from a child, that security that a school should provide. And I'll just end as well with, recently we've seen a number of cases, if you like, in children's social care that have ended really tragically for young people, where their sort of life course has been dictated at a really young age, and it's going to be very, very hard for them to come back from it. And on every occasion I've been able to ask officers, you know, I'm assuming this child was excluded, and the answer is always yes. And we're seeing children excluded, and as Councillor Townsend said, that the playbook runs a certain way, you know, towards the criminal justice system, and towards exploitation and criminal exploitation. You know, we've got an increase in gang violence and knife crime, and there are certain factors that sort of read that picture. And, you know, I'm grateful, I guess, that this is being talked about at a national level as well, because we've got, you know, a disproportionate number of children from ethnic minorities that are affected by exclusion. And just last week, there were a couple of articles, one from Raheem Sterling talking about his exclusion at primary school and having to be on a coach watching all his friends go to school whilst he went to another place that he sort of got himself back from. Back into mainstream, and also listening to Lewis Hamilton talking about his expulsion, as he put it as well. So I think this is a moment to talk about this, and I think this report is leverage for us to do better things, and I think it ties into that wider work that we're trying to do around SEND and we're trying to do around belonging. But there are some really difficult questions there, and it's sort of beyond, it's almost beyond the system within the council, it's societal as well, and I think we'd be wise to have those conversations in the round. Thank you.
And Councillor Bales.
I just wanted to ask about undiagnosed children, because we hear quite a lot of things about unmet needs. Does that include undiagnosed children? So many kids are accused of just being naughty, you know, and they're put in alternative provision, or they're kicked out of school, you know, and they're labelled all of their life, when it could have just taken a simple diagnosis to get them the help they need. You know, that diagnosis could help them for the rest of their lives, in their working lives. And unless they get that diagnosis, you know, they're not getting the help, they're not getting those jobs that they should get. You know, it shouldn't be that hard to get a diagnosis. So what's been done about that?
Thank you. We have a brief answer because we have to move on in a minute.
Yeah, just to say, one of the recommendations in the report is about making sure we have really robust pathways in terms of that early identification and support. So we do have young people in our system who have, and it's classified, I think the language is unmet need. So there is a need that we're not meeting early on enough for that, and that may include diagnosis, but it also may include particular adaptations and resource at a particular point, and actually then that young person becomes more successful because we've got in with that early identification. So, you know, part is about sort of formal diagnosis, and others is actually just about accurate identification in terms of what that young person needs at this particular point in their education.
Thanks. I mean, I'll just follow that up. how often does it occur that someone's in alternative provision? They may have got there through emotional, behavioural issues, but then we find unmet SEND needs. And when we find that, what do we do to feed back to the schools and the system, which, to be honest, had not found that previously? Because often one presumes it's already virtually too late for those children. They would have lost years of education and have been set down a path that's going to be very, very difficult for them to turn around. So what do we do to learn when we find cases like that, if we find any?
Shall I come in? One of the things that we're looking at the moment is our Bristol Inclusion Panel and the steps that have been taken for a child to come to that panel. So looking back to see that the school has done everything that they need to do to support that young person, and have put in as much of the graduated response and the ordinary available provision that we're developing a pathway for, to make sure that schools are following that graduated response, and where they're not, learning from that. And part of this process that we've been on with the reviews that we've had have been shared with schools, with schools, with the Secondary Heads Association, and their reflections around what they can do better. So they're very committed to looking at how that system works and how they can make sure that alternative learning provision is not being overused as well. So I think we do have a commitment from many of our schools, and also, as Alison said, in terms of the developing the relationship and belonging work that we've done, many of our schools contributed to that and are learning from one another. So what we're trying to create is that culture of learning and from each other, and learning from our mistakes or when things go wrong from a young person, for really reflecting on what could have been done better for that young person.
Thanks. I'm aware of time, and we are quite a bit over, and I want to make sure we give reasonable time for the next report. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll move on now to the next agenda item, which I'm afraid is you again, Alison. School places. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kent. I'll keep the introduction of this quite brief, just mindful of time. So you've got a main report, obviously, that looks at an update in relation to school places across Bristol. The main report focuses on mainstream provision, so that's really looking at our early years, our primary and our secondary provision, and then with a supplementary report to this pack focusing on our specialist provision again, which I've already mentioned a few times. So in relation, just in terms of the headlines, in relation to Bristol, we're still seeing the same trajectory of increased numbers coming through secondary, which I know we've discussed previously at Scrutiny, and the one that we saw coming through primary a number of years ago. Although there was a 2% increase in first choices for year 7 this year, the pressure on the provision remains a challenge, and one of the key factors to that is obviously the delay in the opening of the new free school in East Central, due to the hold-up of that wider planning consent for the Silverthorne Lane site. So that obviously adds quite a significant amount of pressure on the system. Obviously, as we have seen that increased number, or bulge as it's referred to sometimes, come through, we've got a falling role in primary. And that surplus of places that then creates, where obviously we've expanded to meet the increased numbers and those have come through the system, and that's also really challenging for schools. So from a financial perspective, because of lower numbers, so we're working with individual schools and settings to really review this, particularly those that are finding it particularly challenging, and as well as sort of looking at numbers of places within that locality in terms of what's needed and what's surplus. One of the pieces of work that again links into that system piece here is the repurposing of some of that available space. So where we look at a shortfall in provision in relation to specialist provision, but we know we've got under occupancy in some of our primary schools, actually repurposing some of that space has been part of the specialist provision project, so that we're able to use that space to meet wider needs in terms of special educational needs and disabilities, such as opening up a resource base with the space available. So phase 1 of the project is beginning to deliver against that, and that's the detail that you've got in that supplementary report, that actually what we're seeing, in spite of the significant delays which I have reported about previously related to COVID, we're starting to see those provisions open up in September and beyond. What you have in the pack as well is you have a timeline or Gantt chart type overview in terms of the range of provision and expansion that will be taking place over the course of 21-22 if all of those get through the various decision-making pathways that they need to. And for academies, part of that sits with the Regional Schools Commissioner as opposed to the local authority, and has to go through a formal board called the Head Teachers Board. So if they all go through from that phase 1, that we'll be looking at an additional 250 places over the next academic year, with obviously a commitment to 450 in the next 3 years. So phase 2 of the project, of the specialist provision project, will also commence next term. So that will look to deliver the remaining needs in a number of localities, and the majority of the provision required remains focused on needs relating to autism and social, emotional, mental health, which is our 2 key needs that we require specialist provision for. They're our leading needs. So again, just hopefully what you're seeing is how all of this starts to fit together, that if we get enough provision for our children and young people within their communities, meeting their needs earlier on, then obviously that starts to enable that young person to be more successful with their education. So again, comes back to that delivering a system that is value for money. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. As chair, I'll kick off the questioning, if that's all right. I'll jump the queue. A couple of questions. Firstly, on the secondary school places, I mean, we can see the numbers are looking very, very tight and not going the right way there for us. I did ask, I think, in our briefing about the new school at the park in Knoll, because obviously that's planned for, is it 2023? And I think you said at this stage they couldn't add those numbers. Is that because that's not 100% guaranteed to go ahead, or is that just a sort of peculiar way that we do our numbers?
It's Ian Bell, as another colleague, has joined me for this. You may want to add something, but it's just to do with the way that the numbers are reflected at the different points. I don't know, Ian, do you want to bring that to life a little bit more?
Yeah, it's just to do with because it's free school, it's a DFE process rather than ours, and they don't put a confirmed opening date on until later in the process. So it's not that there's an issue with the process, they just don't confirm the opening date until later on. So we don't put it onto our figures at this point, because our figures are what's used to work out the shortfall that we've got for any potential capital coming in.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sort of aware that there are several schools around Bristol. I mean, it's particularly probably more the south, but it can be the north as well, who were at schools that we used to, out of area pupils used to go to. I'd still do at Keynsham, Pill, even in Portishead. Now, those numbers have dropped over the years, and one of the issues has been lack of transport. If we get ourselves into a desperate scenario where we do not have enough secondary school places, have you considered the option of laying on school transport for pupils to those schools to try to attract more parents to opt for them? Or is it that those schools don't actually have places anymore? Because I'm aware actually one of the Keynsham schools certainly it had vacancies, but the issue there is all the school buses have been cancelled. So, I mean, it certainly my ward would feed to one of the Keynsham schools normally, but now parents probably are very reluctant to choose to go there because there is no public transport to get their children to the school. Is that something you've looked at as part of trying to solve this problem at all?
The specifics around the schools that you've mentioned, I'm afraid I don't have the detail on. Ian, is that something that you're familiar with?
So, yeah, parts of it certainly, not so much the transport, but the applications. So it's shifted, I think, really. So we've got far fewer pupils going into South Gloucestershire. The overall numbers going into Baines are actually not too dissimilar. So it's just different schools they're going into. but North Somerset has gone up considerably, and that's mainly around St Catherine's, and increased numbers going into St Catherine's. So for some transport is obviously an issue, but for others it's not. Now, that could be a resources
reasonable
issue for
bus
family,
service
of
to Pill. It used to be when I used to live there anyway, so that might be the explanation. Okay, thanks for that. I have one other question actually then, just around the other report on special education places in special schools. I mean, that was, I think, quite welcome reading, certain sections of it. The 450 place commitment was good to read. I personally hadn't read that anywhere else. So I just want to check, what's the financial commitment behind those 450 places? Do we have, what's the cost to deliver those 450 places? How much money do we currently have committed to that total cost?
So just in terms of the, we've focused obviously on the phase 1 to date, and we've got the 3.42 million approved for the small projects which we're spending now. We come back to Cabinet in October, November time to allocate the new capital grant. So that's looking at the risk profile around year 7, but it also means that we allocate and identify the funding available for specialist provision as well. So we get that on an annual basis, and that's carved out. Now, what we don't know at this stage is what the full cost of those additional places are going to be. Again, we're opening phase 2 in the autumn term. That will follow a similar route in terms of putting out the need that we require in terms of the type of need, whether that's autism, social, emotional, mental health, in which parts of the city, and then working with individual schools to receive expressions of interest, but also have proactive conversations to look at how best we can meet those needs. So in terms of the capital funding that's required, that currently is sitting at an unknown, but will be part of that ongoing Cabinet paper around capital investment. Okay,
so I think it was roughly £28 million. That was for the delivery of phase 1, which is the expansion, plus also some replacement of existing places where some schools needed to be rebuilt. So just to check, that 28 million is now fully funded, is it? We've got that money locked down to deliver that.
There's still a shortfall with the Claremont project, so that piece of work is still happening. But in terms of the money approved for these smaller projects, which is a specialist provision projects, that's been secured, and that's a 3.42 million. So
can I just push this a little bit? Of the roughly 28 million, how much of that are you now assured is there for the delivery of the projects? Is it 25 million, 20 million?
I'll need to check those figures. I'll follow up with that.
And then the other 200 places, that's a new project. You'll be bringing that forward in October, and that will have some figures attached to that then.
And that will be, that will be new funding.
Okay, thank you. Right, I will be quiet now, and I'll open this up to the rest of the Commission. Who's first, or second, I guess? Tim. So, Councillor Rippington, then Councillor Townsend.
Thanks, Chair. The risk of sounding a bit pompous. I told the council 20 years ago how to solve the SEN problem by setting up resource bases locally within sort of pods of schools, so that you could have sort of specialists, and then children could go locally, and then you could cut your transport bill massively, which hopefully looks like this is kind of where you're going with this. I think one of my local schools, I think, has put in a bid. Broomhill Infants, I think they're interested in doing that, which is great, because for kids to suddenly not have to travel halfway across the city to get to a specialist provision would be brilliant. What I'm wondering about is how we're going to staff those specialist provisions, because obviously specialist provision, the teaching isn't the same, and we need to find people to do that. So.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because part of the responding to the expression of interest isn't just looking at whether or not there's a space available and the resource to do something with it from a capital perspective. Part of it is also about quality. So making sure that and working with the school to make sure that they can meet, for some of them for the first time, that diverse range of needs through the specialist provision. So when we set up the service level agreement with each school, which is the sort of formal commissioning of these places, we're looking at what needs can be met already within existing expertise within the school, whether or not there needs to be some sort of short-term development, in which case we've got specialist teachers within the council and specialist advisors that can support that training and workforce development as a whole. But for others, they are going out, the funding obviously is there with those places to go out to advert, to recruit specialist teachers into and support staff into the school in order to support those young people.
So, just a quick follow-up. I suppose because this is because this space is becoming available because this bulge has moved up through primary and is now hitting secondary, and therefore you've got space that we created to meet the needs of all these primary pupils, and some of them aren't there now. So presumably there are also teachers that can be moved across and trained up to fill that. Rather than having to find a whole new cohort of teachers to look after those kids. When that bulge moves up through secondary, are we looking a bit further forward and thinking about a similar thing then? Or is there another bulge coming later on that we don't know about yet?
So in terms of specialist provision, the programmes that we're focused on in this phase one, that is primary and secondary. So it's really looking, and it's not just actually for those schools that are sitting with excess space. For some of that, it's actually investing in creating new space in order to meet needs, because actually they've got a real appetite as a school to be more inclusive, to offer specialist provision or work in a different way. And for some, it's about expanding quite considerably the provision that they've already got. So there's a real range in terms of programmes in this phase one. What that will do is take us to a point where we can really then take a look again at the needs, look at the areas in which that need still hasn't been met, and then phase two, because obviously we've been working at pace to try and get enough, just get places opened. Phase two will then look at how we can fill those and have those conversations with settings that are working in a particular area where we know there's a particular need. That is going to take training and support as well to get them ready to deliver those.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few questions about this. So should I ask the ones about the secondary school and primary school mainstream first, just so we're clear about what we're talking about? It says in this paper that you have a good relationship with your schools and your academies. Why is it, do you think, that those very same schools and academies are continuing to refuse local applications from children and offering 160 first preferences outside of the city? Why do you think they're not choosing to change their school-based policies so that all of the places that they've got that are demanded by Bristol children are actually going to educate those children?
Shall I answer that one first? Yep. So in terms of the admissions policy, obviously there are statutory frameworks to work in, but the policies themselves are individual to each school and setting. And for some of our schools and settings, particularly those that are on the border of Bristol, there are offers to schools, to young people outside of Bristol. Just in terms of the numbers on this, because we also benefit from our young people attending schools that are not in Bristol. We've got 196 young people were offered Bristol schools in this last round, but 372 of our Bristol young people were offered places outside of Bristol. So it's not that we're necessarily losing those spaces, but there is that kind of cross-border movement between a number of our young people. So we're not in a deficit position because obviously a number of our young people have secured placement, which is the choice of the family outside of Bristol as well. So it's not a sort of clear offset.
Okay, so for September 2022, there's an increase. You're predicting an increase. Your modelling shows that you're going to need even more places than you do for this September. This September, Trinity is offering 180, isn't it? Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So where are those places going to come from if the Temple Mead School is not ready to take children?
We're still, unfortunately, in the similar position than we've been in for the last few years, where we've seen that increase year on year. Ian may want to add a bit more detail, but certainly what we will continue to do and what we are doing is working with our existing schools in relation to expanding the provision. Now, for some areas, obviously, we've exhausted all that we can, and for others, there's still potential to expand. So it's really about, and this is why the relationship element is important, because it's actually looking to see what schools and settings and school leaders are able to do to support their communities, and certainly, you know, to date, in terms of the increased capacity that's happening year on year because of that delay in the Silverthorne Lane site, we've had an excellent response from our school leaders to try and create new places, often through some small capital support in order to expand. So I don't know, Ian, if you wanted to add any more to that.
Well, I don't think any more. We'll work with the schools as we have done every other year. We try and take account of where children living, parental preference, all of those things to look at the schools that are suitable for expansion. And obviously, any places we create, we want to make sure we get the value for money out of those for Bristol children. So that's obviously going to dictate where we need to invest money.
Okay, moving on to the special school paper. I'm looking at the phase 1 and the phase 2. You say in the paper that there's 139 children as of early July that have requested a special school place that haven't got one. So for the those places that are marked as coming on stream in 2021, are those allocated places already so that this 139 is on top of those places? Or are some of these 139 children likely to be offered places there? And secondly, does the 139 include those children in the ALP settings that we know have EHCPs and therefore are wrongly placed?
I'd need to probably follow up some of the detail on that, but in terms of the 139, obviously they are the young people that the new provision will serve. So we certainly see that we're able to meet current demand through the 250 that are coming online over the 22-23 academic year. Obviously, what we're aware of is that, yes, you're absolutely right, there is potentially some unknowns through the alternative provision, but some of those with the HCPs will be included in those figures. The other element, of course, is that we have an increased number of EHCPs coming through the system. We've got a 40% roughly, and it's not an exact science. It's very difficult to predict because of individual need. But it works out as about 40% of young people with EHCPs require specialist provision. So again, if we look forward and we think about that 450, that is to be able to meet growing demand as well. But those 139 will be met through the 250 that we'll be delivering in the next academic year.
Well, across the bottom it says 121. It's not until August 2022 that you get 185 in terms of place creation. Am I interpreting this correctly?
So you've got September 21 through to September 22, and if you look at the bottom line, the cumulative total is 254.
Yeah, so as of August 2022, you've got 185 places, yeah?
Yes, yep.
Okay, so the 69 that are coming on stream in September, have those places been allocated and this 139 is on top of that?
I'll need to check. I'll get back to you on that detail.
Right, okay.
Coach Townsend, if you can just limit yourself to one more question.
Okay, all right, well, I want to ask a question about the capital spend for 22-23. So these places that you are looking to create in the financial year 22-23, have you got the capital for that? So it's quite a lot of places that you're looking to bring on stream by September 2022. Have you got the funding for that?
So the 3.42 million is to cover off the provision for this phase 1. What we don't have the funding for yet is the phase 2, and the expressions of interest for that will open from a school perspective in the autumn term, and then obviously we will be coming through cabinet in terms of the capital impact of that.
So I don't understand how the cabinet paper last week referenced unallocated capital grant needs funding from 22 to 23.
Sorry, could you say that again?
The paper that came to cabinet last week was referencing unallocated grant need place-based creation funding for the academic year 22-23.
That unallocated funding with the basic need grant is what will come through cabinet in the autumn term.
But the paper went to cabinet last week.
But for the new capital grant. So looking at the funding coming in and what will be available, what we need to put aside in terms of the year 7 provision, what will then be required in terms of that phase 2 funding. So the detail of that looking forward hasn't been finalised.
So you don't know if you've got the money. Okay, thank you. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Was there anyone else who wanted to ask any questions? I know a few of us have dominated this section, so and I'm guilty as anyone. Oh, no? Councillor Townsend, did you have another question? Turns out it was only us who wanted to ask questions.
Nobody else wants to ask.
No. If you had another question, you can fire away. We will have to end the session not long after that, though. Or because I cut you off, or are you satisfied? You're satisfied, great. Okay. Oh, yeah, Councillor Rippington.
Well, I've actually got a question going back slightly that I was going to ask and I didn't have time for. So I just wanted to ask about, I read in the report about AP spaces that the funding for AP schools is different from the funding from special schools from government, and that after a couple of years we end up taking on the burden of that, rather than for special needs schools the whole amount comes from government. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, it's a different funding stream and a different way of funding. So it costs the council more in reality for alternative learning provision than it does for special educational needs provision, because the kind of rebate is different.
So I was just wondering, presumably any new provision, any new AP provision would also have to be a free school. Is that the only way schools get built at the moment, or am I wrong about that?
No, so you can expand existing provision as well. So quite a lot of the all actually of the specialist provision is through expanding existing education estate, the education estate and provision. So exactly that, you don't get caught up in what is quite a long and detailed process in terms of free schools. So the free school window isn't currently open. What we're doing is we're looking at expanding existing estate so that we can get in, we can get the funding, and we can expand it quickly for our young people. Okay, so
I guess what I was getting at is we're not getting shafted by somebody else building a new free school, which is alternative provision, when what we need is more special needs provision.
Certainly not that I'm aware of, and where we have expanded alternative provision, again, it's been very much in collaboration with that trust, and certainly always looking at the need that we need in Bristol.
Thank you. I mean, I'm conscious of time, and I realise we need to go very soon, because otherwise we might get locked in the building. I just want to sort of check with Commission members. We've dealt with some quite hefty reports. We have not actually come out with any resolutions. Are people happy that we've managed to make the points we wanted to make? I think officers have taken on board some of those points and hopefully will go away. Or was there anything people particularly wanted to recommend? Councillor Bales.
I just wanted to say that with all the reports we've looked at today, and even newspaper reports I've read over the last few years, it feels like we're continually being asked to draw a line in the sand and forget what's happened previously, because all of this amazing stuff's going to happen. And I don't think that's fair on us as parents, and that's not fair on our children. And, I haven't even heard any hint of any kind of apology or meaning apology. the council has messed up big time, list our children's lives, and, you know, we should get some kind of apology, and I'm not hearing it.
I think to answer that, one, I perfectly understand the point you're making. Two, we probably only hear because of parents like you who have constantly bashed against the door. Three, to be fair, an apology was actually made by the cabinet member in full council when we had a debate a few years ago. I think change has been slow since, but I personally do feel slightly more positive today. I think we're seeing hopefully something, especially around the special school places, as long as the money comes through. I think the point is, setting targets is great, but if the money is not there, we're not going to get anywhere. And we know that capital funding is it's £28 million just for phase 1, and that's not all there. And to deliver phase 2, one presumes will be somewhere in the region of at least another 10 to 15 million pounds. So that's quite a substantial amount of money, which is not yet fully committed. So I guess that we will wait till October to see the actual figures. We'll know then, and hopefully we'll see the commitment of that money. So I think I hear what you say. Councillor Gollop.
Well, Chair, I have to express enormous surprise at you saying slow the pace on comments about special educational needs, because I think that there are issues, there is progress being made, but I think having discussed the whole issue, there were a number of things that came out of the discussions. And the direction of travel may well be going the right way, but it's not going fast enough for those who are most immediately affected. And I'm not really suggesting that we make this as a political point, although I'm aware it can be seen as that if it comes from scrutiny. But on the other hand, I think we should be making the point on behalf of those like Councillor Bales and others who have, are facing this problem on a daily and weekly basis. And therefore, I think we should be feeding back into Cabinet that there are continuing concerns, and that the ongoing monitoring and progress is something that we desperately need to see. I think on the issue of the Bubb report, Councillor Holland mentioned that she had some concerns about whether appointing a commissioner purely ourselves was actually the answer to the issue. I don't claim, and I suspect none of us claim to know enough to actually prescribe what the answer is. But on the other hand, if we don't pass comment, that report will end up being actioned because it's in writing. And so I think we should be registering that members express concerns on that. So I'm mentioning those two things, but I'm wondering whether you and Dan could look at the minutes when they come out and identify areas that are worthy of a comment to Cabinet, and perhaps agree with your Vice Chair and put something in.
Are you suggesting we put a statement into Cabinet about the key issues that's been raised here tonight? I'd be more than happy to do that. So we can construct a statement based on the key issues raised tonight by people. We will circulate that obviously in advance to spokes to make sure they're happy with the wording, and if they are. I know there is a slot for scrutiny at Cabinet. I'm not too sure if I've got to go through overview scrutiny management to be able to access that slot or not. But I'm sure we can do that if necessary, or we'll just put it in as a statement, one or the other. So I'm more than happy to action that if others agree that would be something they'd like to see happen. I think I'm seeing nodding heads. So I'll do that.
Just to add, Tim, I think if it's a referral from any commission, it has a slot on the Cabinet agenda. I believe that's right, Dan, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's the case. So if the Commission's agreed it should.
Right, so we will do that. So we will action that, and that will be, do we know when the next Cabinet is? It's not next week, is it? Oh, it's going to be very busy.
No, I'll...
Oh, is it? September?
Yeah, it's not till September, Chair.
Oh, right, okay. Well, we have got plenty of time to make sure we write it well and we get all the points in then, and we will make sure we get that in for September Cabinet. Okay, I'm just sort of going through what we had left. We did have the performance report. I had written in advance to say I suspected we would not have time for this item, and I was right. Oh, yeah, sorry, Councillor Godwin. If it's quick, yes.
Yeah, it's very quick. Jeff just made a comment that we've looked at this whole issue tonight, and I don't think we have. I think we've looked at 3 areas around the sort of SEND agenda. So I was wondering whether, obviously I can't suggest what goes on your agenda, but it might be worth looking at sort of where we are against the written statement of action, which is the kind of the wider piece of work around SEND, to see some of the other stuff that's happening. Because I don't think necessarily those 3 reports would give you a picture of all the improvements made since the inspection.
I think that would certainly be high up on our list when it comes to setting our agenda planning for our next 2 meetings. I guess my pushback as a cabinet member, as a commission chair, is that it would be really good if we could get some additional resources for scrutiny, that we could actually have more meetings. I think 3 meetings per scrutiny commission is not enough per year. We will action that letter. We will consult leads, and we will get a copy of it around to all commission members before we look to submit, just to make sure people are happy with that. And on the performance report, we had said we wouldn't have time. We did say if you want to ask questions in advance in writing, people could. We haven't received any yet, but if going home you're still eager, feel free to write any, send them to Dan, and we will make sure they get into the manager. I did ask at Overview and Scrutiny Management on your behalf as a commission how the performance figures are set, and we were told that they're normally set by directors. This year they were going to be done more in consultation with cabinet members. I think I recall it was also said there was going to be some wider consultation in September or October. But I might be making that up. Dan doesn't know. I think he thinks I might be making that bit up. There was something else as well, but I can't remember what it was, I'm afraid. I will go back and recheck the recording and feed that back to you via email. Anyway, thank you all for attending tonight. I know it's been very hot, but I want to make sure we end before 8 so security can lock the building with us not in it. Thank you very much.